Good to be here. Good morning.
Well, it's interesting that the altercations are involving those migrants with Mexican authorities, particularly Tijuana residents who are saying they're overwhelmed by this army, and it's not even the army that could be into the thousands within the next few weeks and months. Hard to say, but obviously they want to get more help. The Tijuana mayor talking about $4 million in extra aid to help them deal with this. What do you think's going on?
So I think from the very beginning we've noticed this caravan to be different than other caravans, and we can see that through their actions and the tactics, the violence and force that being used, the disruption of what's going on down there. We have 3,000 sitting in Tijuana right now. We have another 1,000 plus sitting in Mexicali. And I think the community in Mexico, in particular Tijuana, is worried about the actions being taken by the caravan members, and then what that action then translates to in regards to what we're prepared to do on our borders, in between the ports and at the ports, to ensure that the safety of our border and not be overrun by any masses coming at us.
You know, much has been said, maybe you help me with this, about what constitutes getting asylum status. If your life is threatened, it's one thing, but if you are escaping poverty, sadly, that's another matter, and is not, you know, the definition of seeking asylum status. Now, for many of the Honduran refugees coming in, they're trying to say we're leaving gang violence that is tearing our country apart and threatening our lives. Does that constitute getting asylum status?
It does not. So what we're seeing here is mostly migrants that are coming as economic migrants coming through here. And what's interesting about this group, even though we have migrants arriving in the Mexicali and the Tijuana areas, none of them have applied for asylum on arrival here. So they're here in these shelters. Some of them don't want to go to these shelters, and Mexican authorities are having a difficult time controlling and getting the individuals into shelters in order for them to apply for asylum, but they're refusing to do so.
So what do we do? In that event, as more and more come in, I know the Mexicans have offered, and I get numbers all of that, you might know these better than I do, Pete, that up to 2,000 of the migrants citizenship in Mexico, and many have bypassed that, seeking instead citizenship in the United States or asylum status in the United States. How do we respond to that if we know, well, Mexico just offered you citizenship, you've declined, what's our response?
So, you know, Mexico offered refugee status, asylum status. They've offered them employment. They continue to offer them even as they sit in Tijuana. Many of them not taking them up on that offer. As we know from previous experience, migrants that come through the Northern Triangle, the Central American, very few of them will be accepted for the asylum status, so very few of them will get that status.
Pete Flores, thank you very, very much. I always appreciate the clarifications.
Thank you.
All right, the Migrant Caravan already making their request for asylum as more groups close in on the United States.
But with multiple warnings against entering illegally and U.S. troops amassed at the border, what can migrants expect when they try to cross over?
Here to weigh in, Chief Patrol Agent of San Diego Sector, U.S. Border Patrol, Rodney Scott, joins us from out in San Diego. Mr. Scott, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning.
So, Chief, give us an update on what's going on, because we've been reporting that parts of at least one of the caravan, at least 800 people are in just south of where you are in San Diego, in Tijuana. Give us an update on their plan to ask for asylum, or just to ask whether or not we'll let them in.
So you're correct. We've been monitoring these caravans for a few weeks now as they come up through Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. We've been monitoring the violent tactics that they've used. That's very unique. And they started arriving in Tijuana earlier this week. The first group was about 90, then the next day about 340, and then another group of about 800. We saw them start to use some of the same tactics when they arrived in Tijuana, out on the beach, up on the border fence, starting to tear apart infrastructure. But we've been preparing for a couple weeks now. We've surged in resources. Department of Defense has been helping us harden the border. What that really means is using concertina wire, building obstacles, making it harder to cross between the ports of entry. And we've been staffing up our ports of entry to make sure that that we're ready and that we're not going to be overwhelmed by a bunch of people trying to cross the border
Are
at
you
one
ready?
time.
Because they do want to overwhelm you. There was this guy, Henry Salinas, he was interviewed by Time Magazine. He's 30 years old, and he says this is what they plan to do. It's going to be all against one, one against all of Central America against one, and one against Central America, all against Trump and Trump against all. So they want to overwhelm. They all want to come in at one time. How are you going to prevent them from doing that?
So I think that rhetoric is telling of what makes these caravans different than the ones in the past. But we've been getting ready before this actually happened. We've got nearly 8 miles of new border wall constructed here in San Diego. That construction is ongoing, so that creates some vulnerabilities for us, but that's what Department of Defense has been helping us put in place. I have a great relationship with the U.S. Attorney here, though, and anybody that crosses a border between the ports of entry that's amenable to prosecution, we will charge them with illegally entering the United States. And then the President's proclamation that was recently enacted or put out as an interim rule, you'll be ineligible for asylum if you illegally cross between the ports of entry. So part of it is our messaging, but part of it is our response. And we have shifted several hundred Border Patrol agents into the area. We have better technology than we've had in years. We've unfortunately had to pull people from other areas along the border where they were already gainfully employed. But we're not going to let people mass across the border here in San Diego.
All right, a couple of things. We're going to show some video now. It's not your sector, but it's an important sector, Yuma, Arizona. They look at your barbed wire, and they're coming with cutters. They're starting, you see it here, cutting away. And back to what you said you noticed. You said you've noticed violence. So the caravan members that have already gotten to Tijuana, you've noticed they're a violent group?
I wouldn't say they all are, but I think anytime you have massive numbers of people, your worst actors leverage that for cover, if you will. So within hours of the first couple groups coming, we had clashes at the border. We had people throwing rocks and bottles across at agents. I think some of that was videoed out of Borderfield State Park on the beach. We had a few people getting up on the fence and starting to cut the wire. However, 2 of them I'll highlight. The one ended up being an individual from Guatemala with an extensive criminal history prior in the U.S. He was arrested by the Mexicans and I believe is being deported back to Guatemala. So I have a great partnership with my counterparts to the south. And they're helping me out to the extent they can to take out those bad actors as well.
Right.
So this is a multi-pronged approach.
Mr. Scott, real briefly, do you have any idea how many of the migrants that you've heard about intend to ask for asylum versus just want to come to the United States?
So I can't give you a real number, but I did meet with Mexican counterparts yesterday. I know here in Tijuana that the government met with a large group of the migrants that showed up. They offered them a shelter and they offered them some assistance. A few, primarily family groups, did take that assistance. Mexico has also offered them asylum. A few are having those conversations. But they were a little disappointed that a large portion of the group refused to go to a local shelter. They didn't want to have a curfew overnight. And they said the same thing you said a minute ago. They intended to try to wait for others and then mass across the border.
Rodney, we've heard that the moms and the kids are going to the shelters in Tijuana, and a lot of the men were sleeping outside and on the beaches because the shelters were getting full. What percentage are you seeing are moms and kids versus men?
So I've seen the same reports you have, but what we've physically seen face-to-face, and then most of the videos that I've seen, these groups are primarily adult males. There are definitely families mixed in, but it's well over 50% that are just single adults. They would have a more challenging asylum claim.
All right, Rodney Scott, Chief San Diego Sector Patrol Agent. Sir, thanks for getting up so early to report.
Thank you for what you do. Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
For more insight on the situation at the border unfolding now, I want to bring in Texas Republican Congressman Michael Burgess. Congressman, thanks for joining us on a Saturday. You saw those live pictures out of Tijuana just now along with all of us. Those people don't look like a national security threat to me. Those people look like people who have traveled a long way. They're tired, they're probably hungry, and they're scared.
Well, first off, Jillian, thanks for having me on this afternoon. I appreciate it. I will tell you, after several years of traveling to at least the Texas border and going into the shelters that we provide for unaccompanied minors coming to this country, having traveled to Central America myself, I get it that there are people who do leave for economic reasons, but the statement that was made in the lead-in to this, the rhetoric that is used in the United States Congress, the rhetoric that in the previous administration came out of the White House, was one that implied that if you could get here, you would get a permiso, you would get a slip of paper that told you could come in the country and stay. And that is really what has been so injurious. Think of the difficulty that those people encountered on their trek up here. But in fact, it's a saleable commodity from coyotes and human traffickers in those countries to sell people a ticket or a charge that they can come to the United States. And it's expensive. It is an expensive, dangerous journey for them. So I think it's important to get the word back that it is no longer business as was usual. You are going to have to comply with our asylum laws, and the fact of the matter is it's not a free ticket in.
Look, complying with asylum laws is one thing. That's, a priority for the administration. But critics of the president will say, why create an environment that's inhospitable to refugees and asylum seekers? This is a strong point for America. It's always been thus. Why do we have to change that?
Well, I don't think that is the choice at all. Actually, the difficulty will be on the southern side of the United States border in Mexico. But look, the United States of America takes in more people legally every year than every other country on the face of the earth combined. And it has been that way for several years. I don't have the figures for 2017, the first year of the full year of the Trump administration, but I believe that number will be even a little bit higher. So it's not that we're not welcoming to immigrants, but the other side of this is in 2012, when President Obama unilaterally said, I'm going to change by executive order the immigration laws of this country, the word went back that, hey, if you can get up there and get one of these notice to appear, again, called a permiso, then you're going to be in the country and you've got nothing to worry about. And look at the dollars when unaccompanied minors come into this country. They become then the charge of the Department of Health and Human Services.
All right, well, Congressman, if the administration is planning to welcome people at lawful points of entry, why has the president sent thousands of troops to the southern border? Why are they spread out along all entry points of the border for hundreds of miles?
Because of the onslaught of people that were just being unloaded on this country and unloaded on our social welfare systems. Children that are going to have to be placed in schools, children whose vaccination status is not known. And this has been going on for several years.
So you're comfortable with the idea that, as critics of the president say, he has now militarized the southern border. This is fine to you?
Well, of course, it's not the first time in U.S. history that's happened. But look, here's what I think is more important. The governments of those countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, the governments of those countries, no one forced those people to run for president of those countries, but they have the obligation to take care of their people. And we are spending a ton of United States tax dollars on taking care of their children who arrive in this country. I think we should deduct that figure from foreign aid that goes back to those countries, make it about their money, and that will make it important to those leaders. They need to be stepping up and doing a better job, not encouraging these caravans to leave.
All right, Congressman, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for infusing this conversation with some reasonable, level-headed talk. We appreciate it. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you.
Surplus that they're running up at our expense, and the account surplus, second in the world. And so what else can you do, Laura, if you just say China, stop it, or you don't have any other tools but a tariff? And so I think what Trump is trying to do is, as a first step, saying, you know what, we're not going to try to end your surpluses entirely. Let's just halve them, cut them down to $200 billion. We'll work from there. But he has no leverage unless he has a tariff. And of course, some people are getting fabulously wealthy off China, and some people are getting pretty poor off of what's going on. And we know who they are. Mm-hmm. The elite want more money, and the people out of a job in Bakersfield or Flint, Michigan, they're not too sympathetic to Wall Street cries of anguish.
Another issue I want to get to is that finally it looks like we have most of the races decided, although not all of them. Democrats pick up at least 37 House seats, 336 state legislature seats, 7 governorships, and not as good as we thought it was on Election Day. What does this mean going forward for the GOP, given how the left is continuing to racialize politics? You saw Stacey Abrams refuse to really concede the race or call Kemp a legitimate governor.
Yeah, I think they really have been caught napping. I mean, they really have to look at these not election day ballots, these absentee ballots, because here where I am, we had the Denham race was lost. He won on Election Day. Orange County, it's gone all blue after the election day count was over with. So whatever the reason is, and there's a lot of reasons, they need to address it. They need to get the vote out. They need to have an organized absentee. They need to crack down on eligibility. And then I think Trump's he's got a great message. He's got minority unemployment to record lows. That's giving leverage to people in the inner city, to Mexican American people. When he clamps down the border, there's less competition for jobs. And I think at some point he's got to go into very carefully, he's got to go into inner city situations and landscapes and say, you know what, we've had our rhetorical fights, but I wanted to empower you, and I think I have. And you're better off economically, and you're going to be a lot better off if you let me finish the job. And I think that he doesn't need 50%, 40% of the African American vote. He needs 20%, 25%. Same thing with Latinos, instead of 30, 40%. And I think they need to do that because he's wasting that message. It's a really good message to minority youth and minority communities, and yet he's allowing these very wealthy people who, on every one of these issues, they don't follow through on their rhetoric, and he's letting them demagogue the issue when he's actually doing the hard work of improving the lives of everyday people who are so-called non-white.
Yeah, and I think when you hear the articles and the talk of white supremacy, A.C. Thompson is this PBS correspondent, Victor, who was on your favorite show this morning, Morning Joe, and we have an interesting Q&A. Let's listen.
Are we seeing an uptick in membership of white supremacist groups, neo-Nazi groups, or is it just that they feel the political environment is more inviting for them?
What if I told you it was both? 2015, 2016, we started seeing a massive uptick in activism in this area, new groups, new publications, and I think a lot of those people were emboldened by a political moment.
So, in other words, Donald Trump is inciting, encouraging white supremacists, and then we had other hosts over the weekend, like Kirsten Powers, saying that anyone who supports Trump themselves is racist because he's racist.
Well, yeah, you can see the political strategy. They want to make the Trump brand so toxic that independents and, moderate Republicans don't want to associate with it. But, I mean, nobody said during the Obama administration when Black Lives marched and said pigs in a blanket and all that death rhetoric about police that Obama, because of his indiscreet talks about race, he said a lot of crazy things and had encouraged that. So another thing that really bothers me, I think it bothers all of us, is that you have these very wealthy white people who do have privilege, and one of the ways they square that circle of their own guilt and the fact that they've done pretty well in the system is they blame white supremacy on lower-class whites who don't have any privilege. And they say, oh, white supremacy, and you're doing this and you're doing that in the Midwest, the rural red states. And it's a very strange thing where if you really believed that you need, proportional representation or disparate impact, a lot of these very powerful white males should resign and say, you know what? I have white privilege, and I think I've been on Joe's show a pretty long time, and I think we need a person of color to take my place. I can retire. They never do that. it's always at somebody else's expense that has less money, less influence, less power, and then it's a psychological mechanism, I think, to square the circle of their own contradictions and guilt.
Yeah, I mean, to hear people talk also about this Beto O'Rourke, and you and I chatted about this before, but Politico has a piece, he's Barack Obama but white. Beto O'Rourke blows up the 2020 Democratic primary. First of all, send me a memo when you stop using the phrase blows up. I'm so tired of that. It's like goes viral, blows up. But so now he's the white Obama, Victor.
Yeah, well, he constructed it. He was like Elizabeth Warren or Ward Churchill. And the irony was that they were blaming white women for voting 55% for a Latino, and they didn't say anything about 95% of black women who voted for a white male. And then it was even weirder that Ted Cruz's name is Raphael, his real name, and he was running as Ted, and this guy's name was Patrick, I think, and he was running as Beto. So the real Latino was trying to assimilate, and the fake Latino was trying to cash in an identity politics.
Oh my God, that's hilarious! But I mean, I just call him Robert Francis,
or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Robert Francis O'Rourke. Sorry, Obama but white. That's the best thing I've heard all day. He's Obama but white, so definitely he'll be the 2020 nominee. I think it's all hat and no cattle. All right, Victor Davis Hanson, thank you so much. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, VDH. Love having you on TV and radio. We'll take a break, close it out.
If we work our butts off to make sure that we take back all three chambers of Congress, all three chambers of government, the presidency, the Senate, and the House in 2020, we can't start working in 2020.
She's a piece of work, that Ocasio-Cortez.